Coming up on Virginia Currents, walk in the footsteps of enslaved people from 200 years ago. An eye-opening look at what Richmond was like for people who were treated as property when we tour with the Elegba Folklore Society and Unlocking RVA. Also, we find out how we can face racism in everyday situations and with political scandals through the tools of communication and tolerance during our current conversations. Plus, he started out as a State Department interpreter from Iraq and moved his family across the world to make a new start. Find out how Humam Al-Nakib made Richmond his new home for his family and his restaurant. All next on Virginia Currents. Welcome to Virginia Currents. I'm Amy Lacey. The Trail of Enslaved Africans is a walking trail that tells Richmond's part in the trafficking and enslavement of Africans to Virginia until 1775, and away from Virginia to other locations in the Americas until 1865. We get the opportunity to witness the Elegba Folklore Society and Unlocking RVA in service to the ancestors by sharing their experiences here in the antebellum South.
It's really disturbing that the history of African American people is so insignificant to the recorders of history that the trail was just someplace in the woods over by the river. It's sort of like when people say, I don't see color. Well, if you don't see color, then you don't see me. Elegba comes from the Yoruba cosmology, and they have a spiritual path called Ifa. And inside Ifa, there are Orisha, or intercessors, or aspects of nature. And Elegba, or Eshu Elegbara, is one of those Orisha. And his job is to open the roads, to bring clarity out of confusion. So as an African-centered cultural arts and education organization here in Richmond, the place where more Africans came through than any place else, and that revolving door of an economic market that furnished the whole entire deep South of unpaid labor, we hope that our programs are road opening experiences.
I was doing a walk with Bon Secours a couple years ago, and the question was raised, how could you do this? How could your people survive this? And the young lady said she asked that question to her grandmother, and her grandmother said, because I knew you were coming. We have to always know that there is someone coming behind us, and how we handle that. When I first started doing this work, I didn't have grandchildren. And I would say, I'm doing this work for my grandchildren.
Our intention is to elevate the level of importance of aspects of the African diaspora.
Consider the language that we use when we talk about enslaved individuals. If you notice, you haven't heard me use the word slave. When I talk about slave, I talk about it from an institutional standpoint, the institution of it. But when I talk about the individuals, I use the word enslave.
And so that's why, even though the official name of that geography is the Richmond Slave Trail, we at the Elegba Folklore Society, and we have encouraged others, and some have, call it the Trail of Enslaved Africans, because these were people who were caught up in the condition of enslavement. They had hearts, they had minds, they had families that they left behind. Manchester Dock, which was an entry point, they say for 100 years. Can you imagine? We're sitting here right now. Somebody walks in the door and says, you coming with me? And you can only just get up You can't take anything. You can't take your cell phone. You can't take your camera. Can't call anybody. You coming with me. And whoever you have at your house, in your community, they don't know where you are. You don't know where you are.
While in Benin, we visited different communities in that country, and the former capital of what was then called Dahomey was Ouidah. So when we went to Ouidah, I can remember wanting to walk from the banks to the shore. And as soon as I stepped through the point of no return, I literally became paralyzed. And the only thing that I could do was lean on that structure, and I wept. Africans always connect with their land. I remember hearing the chirping of the birds, and the chirping of the birds was different on that side than I can recall them being on this side. And then I began to smell the air, and the air smelled different on that side than this side. Then I began to realize that everything socially, culturally, and spiritually was taken away from them, only to be embarked on a ship, and you were packaged like sardines in 48 by 18-inch spaces. We were cargo, y'all. We weren't human. They knew that 30% of the property would not make it, so they just packed you in. The more that were packed, the greater number could be salvaged for trade. They were in that position 23 out of 24 hours every day for 3 to 4 months. And as they traveled through different countries in the diaspora, they would arrive here, and then they would be disembarked at night. They were disembarked at night because they did not want the women or the children to experience the heinous nature of those individuals that were disembarked. So here they are at nightfall, getting out of the boat, and as soon as they step on this ground, there is not a spiritual connection.
We are the children of those who chose to survive.
Many of the locations no longer exist, so you have to just say it was here. We got out the research, finding the narratives of our ancestors so that people could hopefully feel something. When it's in a head space and you can just kind of toss words around, you're still distanced from what has occurred.
This is the actual site where the Lumpkins jail compound was.
And we're at a depth of between 10 and 14 feet below the parking level grade here right now, and we're actually beginning to find evidence of a variety of features that relate to the Lumpkins slave jail complex. We found a large area of cobble paving. We know from the historical descriptions that there was a large courtyard area in the center of his property, and we found evidence of that.
This was a compound, and on the compound was his house, it was a hotel, it was a restaurant, and it was the jail. The jail would often hold enslaved individuals that were brought into Richmond to be sold. But Robert Lumpkins apparently fell in love with one of his enslaved individuals. Her name was Mary Lumpkins. He willed his property to the mother of his children. If you were enslaved, the only thing you could really be willed was your freedom. And once your freedom was given in Virginia, you could be here 1 year, then you had to get up out of here. Fortunately, Robert Lumpkins died in 1866, which was a year after the institution of slavery was over. So the will could not be contested. So Mary inherited all of Robert Lumpkins' assets. But in 1867, a Baptist minister by the name of Nathaniel Culver came to Richmond to find a place to start a school for freed blacks. Someone referred Nathaniel Culver to Murray Lumpkins. Murray Lumpkins leased this place that was formerly called the Devil's Half Acre to Nathaniel Culver, and he started the Culver Institution. A couple years later, that institution merged, but they formed what we know as Virginia Union University. This is where Virginia Union got its start. Bringing in enslaved Africans was competition to planters, as they were called, in Virginia. But there were so many enslaved individuals in Virginia, there was a surplus. So the surplus made Virginia a point of reference for buying enslaved Africans. At the height of the trade, 10,000 individuals a month were sold downriver.
We call upon those who may not have died in the best way. We call upon those who sat in the back of a church and screamed out to Jesus to help save them.
Even though Louisiana was the #1 importer of enslaved Africans, at the height of the trade, individuals came from as far as Louisiana to purchase enslaved Africans from here. There's a reconciliation triangle partnership between Richmond, Benin, and Liverpool. The design was done by youth from Liverpool, Benin, and Richmond. The design tells the story of the trade. There's a bird on here, and that bird is a bird that is very popular in Africa. It's symbolic, and it's called the Sankofa bird. The Sankofa bird states that you have to look back so that you can move forward. And by the way, this inscription was done by youth from Richmond middle schools. Acknowledge and forgive the past, embrace the present, shape a future of reconciliation and justice. One is done in French, the other is English because Benin it was colonized by the French.
Right where the reconciliation statue is now, Solomon Northup calls it Goodin's pen, but it was likely Goodwin. This Thomas Goodwin, he had 3 locations in Richmond. And at the time that Northup came through, the location was at 15th and Main right there. History hidden in plain sight. Richmond is a place where the pebble dropped. And if we can get our socio-cultural, historical, and therefore economic realities straightened out in Richmond, just like Richmond helped to shape America's evolution then, it can help to get it straightened out now.
For more information on Janine's organization, Elegba Folklore Society, visit efsinc.org. Also visit unlockingrva.com. Racism and bigotry have left a stain on America's history. It's been as blatant as the slave trade and Jim Crow laws in the South, to more subtle acts yet equally impactful in preventing some people of color from advancing in certain jobs, professions, even access to quality health care. In today's political climate, racial tensions are high, especially due to Virginia government officials being under fire for engaging in the mockery of African Americans by dressing up in derogatory and offensive costumes. We're recording this segment February 12, 2019, when this issue is very much in the headlines. Here with us today to give us some insight on how we can combat racism head-on is activist, artist, and ambassador Yewande Austin. She travels around the world teaching strategic diversity leadership, social responsibility, and youth development. Thank you so much for coming in here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Your organization is called the Global Institute for Diversity and Change. What exactly is it?
So we're a capacity building consultancy. What that means is that we produce a range of programs that teach our clients how to create safer, more inclusive, and equitable spaces, from professional workspaces to the spaces in which we learn and the communities in which we live.
We are having this conversation here in Virginia. What is your first memory of racism in the Commonwealth?
As a woman of color, I think it's safe to say that I've experienced many forms of blatant racism and subtle racism virtually every day of my life, but none was scarier to me than when I moved to Virginia. I will never forget the day that I jumped off of that moving truck and was so excited. The Virginia Commonwealth University had brought me to become the very first diversity lecturer in residence in the Office of the Vice President for Health Sciences, to teach pre-health and professional health science students how to integrate diversity into the practice of healthcare. I was so excited to be here. And in the museum district, nothing prepared me to greet my white neighbors to receive no response in return. Nothing but stares. Yeah. I remember in those moments feeling a sense of fear that I had never felt in the developing world and villages where I work, to the outer reaches of the United States. Never had I lived in fear, but their silence told me that I wasn't welcome. And for a moment I thought I had made a really big mistake moving to Virginia.
As a woman of color, do you use experiences like that one and others to fuel your passion to spread the word for the need for equality?
Certainly. Well, we're preparing to commemorate the 400 year since the first group of enslaved Africans were brought to the United States, and more specifically to Virginia. I think it's safe to say that we've made a lot of progress, but recent events have shown us that we have a long way to go. It's not entirely our fault. Scientists say that there's a default mechanism in us as human beings that's designed to reject anything that is different than us. But what I have learned through my work is that education is key to teach people how their biases can be very destructive. And so I take that on as a deep responsibility.
And you do educate the community. You teach something called REAL. Tell us what that is.
I do. So racism is a very complex issue. Johann Blumenbach knew exactly what he was doing when he created the concept of race, which was designed to divide and oppress communities. And so I address it in the phrase REAL. R, standing for representation. So critical that we have representation of diverse populations that represent our community in places where we govern, teach, educate, and provide health care. E for education. Many people grow up in environments where they simply don't understand there are biases that have developed because of the spaces in which they grew up, as well as reinforced by media. A is for accountability. We've got to have accountability measures in place to hold our leadership responsibility. And L is for love. Very often we underestimate the power of love and how if we just treat another fellow human being the way we would want to be treated, we could eliminate a lot of this behavior.
For people who say racism doesn't exist here in our communities, what is your response to that as far as that it does?
Yeah. Sadly, racism permeates through every segment of society. We see it in healthcare, where African American women are the largest population of marginalized patients within healthcare. We see it in education, where in the state of Virginia, less than 40% of all children under the age of 10 are literate. There is no question that racism is affecting us in small and major ways. But what we have to do is we have to look at the issue. And the issue is that racism is a disease, and education is an important part of that cure.
For people who aren't aware of blackface and really what the issue is, what is an action that would equate to that for a Caucasian, for folks to really realize how offensive that is and just how that can tear you apart?
Amy, there is no equitable representation for what blackface would be for the white community. There is none. Blackface is a systemic tool that was used to reinforce negative stereotypes about people of color, stereotypes that made us seem as if we were ignorant, as we were less valuable, that we were violent. And when you reinforce those ideas about a community, it spreads like a disease. So what we have to do as a community is not go to that quick solution like a Band-Aid, like impeachment, but really develop a cure.
Can communities heal from these types of events?
We certainly can, and I think we've seen enormous progress in just the past year. Over 100 women of all backgrounds are now in positions of government that weren't a year or even 2 years ago. So that's a sign of progress, and I think it's showing the younger generation that although we still have a long way to go, they are now empowered because they see representation that gives them an idea that I can do that. I can make a difference, my voice matters, and it needs to be heard in the highest levels of government and positions of power.
Yewande Austin, thank you for sharing your ideas with us, adding to our conversation here in Virginia.
Thank you.
For more information about Yewande's work and the organization Global Institute for Diversity and Change, visit globalinstituteforchange.com. Imagine moving your spouse, children, and business across the world to start over, and everyone's safety depended on it. It's the story of Humam Al-Nakib, who served the United States as an interpreter for the U.S. State Department in his native Iraq. I spoke with him earlier this year when he owned the market and restaurant Mesopotamia Delicatessen in Short Pump.
We came here to 2010, actually. Yeah, that's when we came here. A friend of mine who's a lawyer, he is from Richmond, and he advised me to come here. It is actually, I'm very, very blessed. I had more opportunities to go to other places in the nation, but I chose to be in Richmond. It's the best place ever for me. So it was back in 2005. I was looking for a job as an interpreter through a friend of mine who had some, like contacts through one of the companies at the time, and they were looking for an interpreter to be like a legal interpreter because they have some kind of project that I fit in. We did a lot of development to the Iraqi government at the time. We used to work in the green zone, and we have to do all our operation outside. So the way we travel is in the convoy. And there was several times that we were shot at. There we lost some dear friends. We were like 2 cars behind us. So it was not an easy thing. But once you are back to your green zone or the other base, then it's okay. But in the way back and forth, it was dangerous.
Is there that fear every day when you're living among that?
Yes, I would say yes. It's still very, very unstable. I would say we've been in bad situation, but thank goodness we are now here. So it's what's done is done. We've been in some tough situations.
You had an operation much like this in Baghdad. Go back there and tell us how you were able to transfer that idea here to Short Pump.
So it all started in Baghdad when my wife graduated, and we were looking to do some kind for a family, and we started with a tiny little thing to make some cold sandwiches in Baghdad, which was not big at the time. We actually started with like maybe 30 sandwiches a day. In less than 3 months, we were doing like 400, 500, because it was a great idea and people loved our cold sandwiches. But since I came to the state, I decided you know, it's about time to share my cuisine, which is the Middle Eastern food. And I think that we are making a good success here. We have people who comes from other places like Charlottesville, Northern Virginia, Chesapeake Bay, even from Chicago to try our food. Yogurt and tahini. And of course, hummus, baba ganoush, tzatziki is also your side, sir. At the meantime, I don't think it's very wise for me to go back home. Hopefully in the future when things get cooler, maybe.
How hard is that to be away from family, that far away from family?
Well, I would say it is very hard actually, but again, I have my wife and my 3 kids, and they are my family now, and that's what I love. And as a matter of fact, I would say Richmond is a part of my family. I do miss home, but again, as long as I'm surrounded with the love of my family, I'm good.
So really, wherever your family is, that's where home is to you.
It is absolutely right.
Since we visited Humam in January, a lease issue caused him to close his Short Pump Market and restaurant. He hopes, though, that he'll be able to move to a new location in the city. Thanks for watching Virginia Currents. Join us next time for more inspiring stories. I'm Amy Lacey.